Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the importance of scientific peer review and the process involved in the peer review. I'm Dr. Neelu Nawani, Professor and in charge of Microbial Diversity Research Center at the Dr. D.Y. Patil Biotechnology and Bioinformatics Institute in Tathavde, Pune. So what is the meaning of peer review? So in research, whenever we have to go ahead for a publication, it is very important that we take the opinion of our peers. There are expert peers who have a large expertise in the subject area, given subject area, and you take an opinion of those about the work that you have done. So the opinion of the peers who are experts in the field of your scholarly work is what is called as peer review. Now, why should we do a peer review? Peer review is important because it enhances the quality of your research article. Plenty of research articles are submitted to a large number of journals every year. But not all the research articles meet the expected standards or they are of a high quality. So, there is a process in which these research articles are filtered out and only high research quality articles are the ones which get accepted in those journals. Now, the process which is involved in converting these research articles which may be of a good quality or which may require improvement, that process involves a large number of reviewers, it involves the editor of the journal, and overall the objective is that the quality of the research gets improved. They would also check for validity, originality and the importance of your research. So why is there a need of peer review? Partly I have already explained what is the need of peer review, but the major focus is that if your research is novel, if it is innovative, and if it has got a lot of aspects which are significant to the world, then but obvious it will get accepted. However, it is also important to understand how you have executed this research. How did you perform the experiments? What were your results? How did you analyze the data? And therefore, it is also crucial to understand that in this community, what others are doing, which we call as literature survey. We have to understand what kind of work other people, other research groups are doing. So you also need to analyze the data properly, you need to organize in a good fashion, and eventually you need to also check if the language is of a good quality. So when combining all this together is what gives you a better quality article, and that is what is the need and why is there a need of peer review. Now this slide talks about the overall peer review process. Now as you can see, the author would first submit an article to the journal editorial office, and then they would be assessed by the editor. The editor would look for the quality and would either reject the article, or if the editor thinks that the article is good enough for sending further to a review process, the editor would send it to the review process. And then once the review process is started, there would be a number of reviewers who would be assigned, maybe one reviewer, maybe two reviewers, and accordingly they would give their remarks or they would give their reports and would suggest the editor if the article should be accepted or if it should be rejected or if it requires major or minor revisions. Accordingly, you get a communication as an author, corresponding author would get a communication from the editorial office that your paper is accepted, rejected, or it needs certain revisions. And finally, when you respond to these queries, when you revise the article according to the suggestions which are made, it undergoes a review process again. And finally, once the reviewer gives a go-ahead that okay, now the paper is of good quality and has shown significant improvement and must be accepted, then it is accepted. Sometimes the editor would take a decision on behalf of the reviewers, particularly when the changes are minor, when the revisions are minor. Now this particular slide shows what kinds or what types of peer review processes are available. The most common review process is the single-blinded review process, where reviewers can see who are the authors, but the authors cannot see who are the reviewers. Then you also have a double-blinded process, where neither the reviewers can see who the authors are, nor the authors can see who the reviewers are. And you can also have independent reviews or interactive reviews. Independent reviews means two reviewers would give their independent opinion, or two reviewers would give their cumulative or interactive opinion on your article. There are some more types of review processes which have come up. One of them being the open peer review, which is becoming largely popular these days, where the reviewers and authors would know each other, and it is a very transparent process. So this has led to the evolution of a further transparent peer review, where the remarks of the reviewers and the responses of the authors can also be published with the manuscript. Another is a collaborative or interactive review, which I have already briefly discussed, that two or more reviewers would give their cumulative feedback on the research paper or on the given article. And then there is something called as third-party peer review, where the authors may get the article reviewed by an independent third party and then would submit to the journal for the review process. So this would take into account a considerable amount of exercise which the authors would do or the team would do to make the paper of a better quality. Now, what are the pillars of peer review? Well, collaboration. What is the objective of the peer review? What is the rigor of the peer review? And how transparent is the process? These four pillars ensure that finally the quality of the research article is enhanced. By collaboration, we mean it's a process which requires cooperation between authors, reviewers, and the editor. By objective means all three teams, the authors, the reviewers, and the editorial office, eventually have the same goal. They have a focus, or they should have a focus on enhancing the quality of the research articles. They should ensure the validity of the research, whether the research that is done is appropriate or not. Rigor, which talks about a fair, comprehensive assessment of the research that has been carried out. And lastly, the transparency. Transparency is nothing but accountability, a joint accountability and responsibility for the paper to be delivered to the public and to the scientific community in order to deliver a final good quality publication. So with these four pillars, if all the objectives are met, the peer review process actually turns out to be a very enjoyable process both for the authors and the editors and the reviewers, because you kind of learn from each other too. Now, why is transparency important in a peer review process? Transparency is very important in every sphere of life. So, in scientific processes or in academic processes, this transparency becomes crucial because you can actually come up with more constructive research and more constructive ideas, more innovation, and something which can be applied to the benefit of the whole world, provided your process is transparent. Now, what are the acceptance criteria? So, first thing is you need to understand that the research has to be very valid. Second thing is that if the research is valid, you need to also understand that if it has been done in a proper way. So, the way the experiments were executed, how were the results, how was the analysis done, and then finally determining how the results were compared with the available literature, and whether there is some novel concept coming out of the given research. So all these aspects are looked at in order to establish a certain criteria for accepting a paper. Now, is it mandatory for an academician to accept every invitation that they get for review? No, not at all. It's not mandatory for every academician or any academician to accept. So you can always decline. Suppose if you get an invitation from a journal for peer review of an article, it's up to you. You can always decline to go ahead with the peer review. So there have been a large number of studies which have shown that how people have accepted, or what kind of reasons do people give for declining the peer review. So the maximum is 68% of them say they don't have time. Obviously, academicians and scientists are involved in their daily routine work, but then this is a job which demands time and it demands attention also. Plus, it is a job of responsibility. So therefore, there are many people who do not commit to such responsibility very easily, and therefore the common reason is that I didn't have time. Another prominent reason is personal reasons, or the manuscript did not match the area of expertise. And very small percentage is about the conflict of interest, maybe with the authors. Now, over the years, there have been innovations in peer review. And if you take an example of a big publishing hub like Elsevier, Elsevier has come up with a concept called as volunteers. So we have volunteers, people who volunteer for a particular act, and these are called volunteers. So which means that people of requisite expertise come forward and they offer to do a review process themselves. So those would be called as volunteers. So reviewers can volunteer for reviewing articles in specific journals, and for that there is a platform which is called as Reviewer Recognition Platform that has been created. Whenever you register as a volunteer on this platform, according to your expertise, if there is a new manuscript that is submitted, you get an intimation that there is a new manuscript submitted and whether you would like to go ahead and review this or not. Once you accept to review and you have completed the review process, then the editor would provide a feedback to the volunteer about the work, how he or she has executed. So overall feedback on the review report, and also as a volunteer you can give a feedback to the editorial office about their procedure. So it is a collaborative effort, and this is something which makes the whole process of peer review more fun, because you can kind of network with different people, you kind of collaborate with different people, and everything is, in science is teamwork, I would say. Another innovation that has happened over the years in peer review is results masked review, RMR. Now this is a relatively new concept where you can actually mask your results, which means that you can submit your research article, but you do not have to submit the results. You would submit the research question, your hypothesis, and you would submit the methodology which you have used, and you need not submit the results. Now, there are people who may be a little skeptical for submitting their results to others, maybe because they want to protect the IP for that point of time. So for such kind of researchers, this is a very good option. Now, the data would already be collected, but the only difference is that you do not submit your research along with the results, along with the methods and the hypothesis. Now, this model has been adopted from the registered reports, in which introduction and methods are given, what analysis you proposed is given, and this is pre-registered and will be reviewed. And after it is reviewed, then you conduct your research, which means you get a feedback about your ideas and about how you plan to do your work beforehand, before you actually go ahead and submit your results to the journal, which is a very interesting concept. So this is a process which is followed in the case of results masked review. So you can see that in the stage 1, you would just go ahead with a peer review of introduction and methods. It would go ahead with an editorial assessment, and the team would decide whether it should be rejected or it should go further in the review stages. So in the first stage of review, it would further go ahead. If it is in principle accepted, the authors would be communicated accordingly. Sometimes a revision may be required, which would be indicated to the authors then. If the authors decline to revise, the manuscript gets rejected, But if the authors are more open-minded and they accept, generally the authors are open-minded because the reviewers are supposed to have more expertise. So once the authors would make the changes as the reviewers have suggested, it is communicated to the editor, and finally in the stage 1 review, in principle it gets accepted, as I said. And then it moves on to the stage 2, where you are now going to submit your full paper, which means now you can submit your results and discussion part. And once you have submitted your results and discussion part, at this stage also, mind you, the manuscript can get rejected. So, which stage 1 review doesn't give you a guarantee that the paper would be accepted at the stage 2. So at the stage 2 also it has to be rigorous peer review. Now they would more focus on what methods you have used, whether the results are coming according to what hypothesis you have done, and how you have concluded your work, how you have discussed your work adequately, and all those factors. And finally it would be conveyed to the authors whether whether the journal offices or the reviewers are accepting your paper or it's getting rejected. Another innovation in peer review is the unrefereed preprints. Now this is becoming very common. You have BioRxV, you have MedRxV kind of services which have been started in collaboration with Yale University, Cold Spring Harbor, and big names. And the research, these are preprint servers. So you actually publish your research on this preprint server without any peer review. So you just have to communicate to the preprint server office that your intention is to go ahead and put this on your preprint server. The manuscript would be then put as a preprint. It is not peer reviewed, let me tell you. And other scientists would be able to see your paper, they would be able to discuss your paper, they can comment on the findings. But you need to understand that this is not a peer-reviewed article. So, if there is media which is picking up this research and is wrongly taking it that it's published, no, it's not peer-reviewed. It's merely published as a preprint. So this also helps in improving the quality of your research because you haven't submitted it for peer review, and you can always take into account the suggestions which are given by the scientific community members, and accordingly you can think of modifying or improvising your work. Now, a very big responsibility on the peer reviewer is to write a peer review report. Naturally, as a peer reviewer, what should be your objective? So your objective should be to prevent publication of very poor quality work, or in other words, to help improve the quality of work, to check if the research has been carried out properly and if there are any flaws in the design or in the methodology, to ensure that the work has been reported correctly and there are no ambiguities in the reports or in the research. You need to acknowledge the available literature. You have to ensure whether the research has been interpreted correctly and whether the research data is of a very primary or a very speculative kind of nature of data. So those have to be checked. And also you need to see what is the innovative potential in the research and the theories or the hypotheses which have been proposed by the authors. How is the work going to be of greater interest to the scientific community or readership, and how overall you can improve the quality and readability of a publication. So your peer review report must include all these points. Now, as I said, being a peer reviewer means holding a lot of responsibility. So you have to hold to your values and you have to hold to your ethics as a reviewer. So when you go through an article as a peer reviewer, you need to check whether because you're working on behalf of a journal, you have to check whether the article is in line with the journal's scope. Second, does your expertise cover all the aspects of the article? Is the article innovative? Is it publishable in principle? Further, if you talk about the technicalities, you need to check whether the introduction, the abstract, whether they are clearly given and they are relevant to the research that is proposed. Second, you need to check whether the methodology, the questions have been given appropriately. Third, are the results clearly and logically presented? Are the results justified? Finally, do the conclusions justifiably respond to the main questions? So you need to very judiciously go through the manuscript and put yourself in the position of the reviewer, give a transparent and a fair review of the entire process. So you need to be professional, you need to be pleasant, you need to be helpful, you need to be scientific, you need to be timely, you need to be realistic, empathetic, be open, organized, and finally you need to give a really fair report. Well, having said that, let me also come to certain incidences which are not so pleasant, and one of them is ghostwriting. So peer review ghostwriting is actually an unethical practice, a very unethical practice, but what it is. So what is peer review ghostwriting? So when scientists or academicians, they assign manuscripts to their graduate students or to their postgraduate students, which means that it's the students who are actually reviewing the article, and they are writing a peer review report. But it's not you are just glancing at it. Now, that is what is called as a peer review ghostwriting, because actually you have not reviewed the paper, your students have reviewed the paper, but the credit goes to you because you are contacted by the journal office. So the journal office assumes that you have peer reviewed the paper, which is not the case. It's your students who have done it. And the names of these students is never disclosed to the editorial office or to the journal office. So this is something which is a wrong practice, and that's why it's called as a ghostwriting or ghost reviewing. Another point of concern is that peer reviewing is generally a free service. Generally academicians or scientists will not be paid for this kind of an activity. It is considered that it's an academic or a research activity. So peer reviews do not generally get paid for their time, but the publishing houses, the journals, they already make a lot of money. So there have been some examples in the recent past, where reviewers have raised their voice and they have started demanding that they should be paid for the work that they are doing. So for example, there are some journals in psychology, which is a very rare example of a journal that gives the reviewers an option of monetary compensation. So there are some journals who are actually paying the reviewers for their work and their time. Another point is that some of the very reputed people in the field of sciences or in psychology or other academicians have mentioned that we will continue to review papers or volunteer for reviewing papers for non-profit publishers. But we would just say no to profit publishers. They should offer a payment to us. Another opinion has been, if you want to recognize me for peer review, pay me and pay everyone who reviews for you. So these are different reviews by very well-known academicians in their field, and people have become more aware that you cannot make profit utilizing somebody else's intellect. So if you are taking services from someone as a monetary compensation, you should either offer monetary benefit to them, or you could give them some opportunity to publish in your journal without paying any article processing charges. So these kinds of things have now started, there's more awareness about these things, and there are a lot of debates go on social media regarding these points. Now, I have been saying repeatedly that peer review is it's a task of great responsibility, and we should caution ourselves that we should not be learning it in a difficult way. So, Lancet had a bad experience when they published a paper which claimed that there was a connection between hydroxychloroquine and COVID-19 mortality. So considering this paper, when people started reviewing it more, other scientific communities started looking at what was happening, they were surprised to see that the data was not very good. In fact, the data was not authentic. and that is why it led to the retraction of this paper. So such kind of unfortunate incidences shouldn't happen, and therefore journal office, publishing houses, authors, reviewers, editors, they have a great responsibility. So as I said, peer reviewing is a big responsibility. Unfortunately, a report of 2019 says that 127 papers from India were retracted for duplication of images and manipulation. So we need to stick to the core values, as NIH has explained on its website, that what are the core values of NIH when they do a peer review. It's fairness, confidentiality, impartiality, expert assessment, security, efficiency, transparency, and lastly, integrity. So these values all of us must inculcate in order to give the impact of the peer review process. Another term which I need to introduce to our audience is citation hacking. So reviewers, they force people, the authors, to they ask them to put extra references during the peer review process. So those reviewers who start getting more citations to their own work by asking authors to add up certain articles during the peer review process is what is called as citation hacking, which means they tend to increase their citation by asking authors to put their papers or cite their papers. So this has been, so an overall survey was done, and what people said is that citation-based metrics should exclude self-citations, and this has already come in practice. Nowadays, self-citations are automatically excluded when you go ahead and check your citation indexes. But what I all said and done, what is the overall opinion about peer review? Peer review is an essential process. It has been going on very well. It has evolved very well over the years, and a large portion of academic community accepts that this kind of process should continue and go on, but with innovations and improvements which are most welcome. So as you can see, almost 60% people accept that there is a need of a fair review process. 25% are indifferent, and maybe a very few of them, a small percentage, are not very satisfied with the review process. So overall, what we need to understand is that we have a great responsibility as a peer reviewer. We should be very fair and impartial to the article which is coming to us. Look through properly whether the research has been really systematically done and organized, and if there are any points of or any queries or any concerns, you need to address those concerns. If you get an appropriate explanation from the authors, go ahead and accept it. Otherwise, it's wise to simply write to the editor that this is a paper which cannot be accepted. So, with this, I would conclude my talk, and I would wish good luck to all those who are into this publishing field, into review process. And lastly, I would just say, act responsibility. I thank Dr. D.Y. Patil Vidyapeeth, Pune, for giving me this opportunity to present this small talk on the review process. Thank you so much.